Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market stocks continue to see risk appetite capped today by fears of an escalation in the US-China trade war. However, we did see MSCI's developing world stock index consolidating gains from Tuesday's session, which of course lifted it off a more than 4-month low, which had hit at the start of the week. On the continent, Nigeria's stock exchange continues to rally today, with the all share pushing above that 30,000 psychological mark. That, of course, is all due to its two largest quoted companies, that's Dangote Cement and, of course, newly listed MTN Nigeria. They both gained almost 10% on the day. Now, also coming up on the show, Kenya launches a new mortgage refinancing company to support aspiring homeowners. There is growing uncertainty on whether Theresa May can breathe some life into her Brexit plan. And Tunisia launches a program that supports female agricultural workers. Well, let's start off the show in Kenya, where President Uhuru Kenyatta has presided over the launch of Kenya's first mortgage refinance company. Now, the financial institution will be under the Central Bank of Kenya's supervision. It is expected to enable commercial banks to access money for onward lending for mortgages in the country. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with the story.
Let us appreciate the Kenya Mortgage Refinery Company.
Kenya has just launched its first mortgage refinancing company. Its mandate is to make it easier for banks to access long-term funds for cheaper home loans. Major shareholders include the National Treasury, the World Bank, and 8 commercial banks, among others. Through Treasury, the Kenyan government owns a 20% stake in the firm, while the private sector has an 80% share.
The Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company will be expected to provide fixed rate, long-term, low-interest funding to primary mortgage lenders, which would be passed on to home buyers. Fixed rate mortgages, I believe, would protect homeowners from the risk of interest rate volatility, hence allowing them to be in control of their monthly commitments and afford their homes.
The World Bank has approved a $250 million loan to go towards mortgages for affordable housing. The Africa Development Bank, on the other hand, gave $100 million towards the same objective. KMRC will raise debt from markets, including mortgage-backed bonds, to lend to banks and cooperatives using their mortgage loan contracts with customers as security.
So when you look at the cost of a mortgage, it's significantly contributed by the tenor. The shorter it is, the more expensive it is, and the more people cannot be able to afford. So KMRC is coming in to provide long-term. So we are talking about 15-20-year money, which is what is missing in this market.
Some of the challenges facing would-be homeowners include high land prices, tough mortgage conditions like high interest rates of 12% and over, as well as short loan tenures of 5 years or less. In comparison with South Africa, where the ratio is 1-to-1, the cost of paying a mortgage in Kenya is on average 6 times what one would pay for rent.
And according to the Central Bank of Kenya, the total outstanding mortgage debt in 2017 stood at about 223 billion shillings. This, however, represents only about 2.7% of GDP, which shows clearly that in Kenya, the industry is still very small. South Africa, as an example, boasts of a mortgage sector accounting for approximately 31% of its GDP.
The National Treasury is developing a credit guarantee scheme. Once operational, it will support millions of credit-worthy potential borrowers who currently cannot access loans as they do not have a formal salary. According to the World Bank, in a country of just under 50 million people, commercial banks hold only about 26,000 mortgage loans. The plan is to get banks lending to people on low or irregular incomes and support the Kenyan government's plan to build 500,000 affordable homes in the next 5 years. Alexandria Majala for CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's head to South Africa now, where the Minerals Council has re-elected all its top officials back into office. This, of course, comes as the council held its annual general meeting in Johannesburg. Now, of course, South Africa's mining industry is currently under pressure, with some of its members facing challenging times. CGTN's Angelo Coppola attended the AGM and filed this following report.
The South African mining sector is still under pressure, and that's despite an uptick in commodity prices. And according to analysts, that's because the mines aren't taking advantage of the increased prices quickly enough.
So mechanically, there has been recently about a year lag. So mechanically, we should be turning shortly. But I'm afraid the companies, the very fact of the 1 year lag is because they can't respond quick enough. And the inhibitors are very well known. I mean, it's electricity and it's Transnet and it's the harbours and so on.
Mining and Eskom are joined at the hip. If Eskom fails, we fail. That's how critical the businesses are for us. So number one is Eskom, and the restructuring of the ESI, making sure pricing increases don't keep on coming the way that they have been, restoring our global competitiveness and the reliability of supply are key issues.
One of the often heard criticisms from business is that the lack of policy certainty leads to investment decisions being postponed. In the mining sector, that focus has shifted from the mining charter, which has been broadly agreed to environmental issues.
There's a transition in the environmental legislation, and there are 3 sets of them, and they are not finalized. And what is often happening is that one department in the transition says, but they're trumping all the others. And it is very uncertain and it can be very costly, and one of them is the carbon tax.
You can't put in place policies that are certain and predictable but which are uncompetitive. So we need to improve our competitiveness as a sector. We have gone backwards in the last sort of 10 years up until 2017.
The mining sector isn't out of the woods in South Africa just yet, and if the Eskom electricity prices aren't managed differently and brought down, we're definitely going to see more consolidation in the sector in the very near term. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. South African telecoms giant MTN has paid more than 3/4 of a record $1.5 billion fine, which was leveled by Nigeria. Africa's biggest wireless operator was fined about $3.9 billion in October 2015 after failing to disconnect about 5.1 million subscribers. MTN has until the end of this month to pay the final tranche of that fine. And Africa's biggest publicly traded packaged food company, Tiger Brands, has reported a decline of 12% in its half-year earnings. The South African firm attributes the fall to continued pressure on consumer spending and lower sales in international markets. Now, Tiger Brands has lost about 42% of its value since it was blamed for last year's deadly listeriosis outbreak. And the UK's second biggest steel maker, British Steel, has been ordered into compulsory liquidation. The move follows a breakdown in rescue talks between the government and the steelmaker over a $38 million bailout loan. That, of course, is following dwindling European sales amid Brexit uncertainty. And finally, South African petrochemical firm Sasol has increased the cost estimates for its giant Lake Charles chemicals project in the US to as much as $12.9 billion. The cost blowout is a further setback for the development, which has already suffered a number of budget increases as a result of weather delays. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. We'll be looking at various projects funded by the African Development Bank in Tunisia. And businesses in Zimbabwe are at loss due to rolling power blackouts for hours at a time.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back to Global Business Africa. Now, the partnership between Tunisia and the African Development Bank has lasted for over half a century now, and that partnership has led to a total financial commitment of about $9 billion. The funding covers various sectors, including energy, water, transport, agriculture, and social development. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with more on that story.
The African Development Bank AFDB Board of Directors approved $134 million worth of funding for the implementation of the second phase of the Financial Sector Modernization Support Program.
The funding will improve the capacity and efficiency of the financial sector in Tunisia. AFDB and other partners grant funds with favorable conditions.
MPs from the Finance Commission at Parliament say the AFDB funding will help structurally transform the Tunisian economy and reinforce its integration in the African financial market.
Tunisia aims to reposition itself in the African market. We cannot build a strong economy without a modern market financial sector.
The Minister of Investment had stressed the importance of AFDB support to Tunisia.
We thank
the African Development Bank for its great effort. For decades, the African Development Bank has supported Tunisia. Our relationship with AFDB is exceptional. Now we aim to preserve these relations and to further develop it.
The Financial Sector Modernization Support Program seeks to increase the private sector's contribution to job creation and to involve the underprivileged populations in an added value creative development dynamic. The African Development Bank Fund will support setting up guaranteed products for small and medium-sized enterprises. It will also facilitate access to the funding of innovative structures and help set up the SMEs Restructuring Fund, which will target 600 structures. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's head to Kenya now, where lenders are now responding to growing competition from mobile phone-based lending services. 5 Kenyan banks have launched a lending service via mobile phone. It is aimed at getting credit through to the country's small and medium-sized businesses. Now, under the new pilot service, KCB Bank, Commercial Bank of Africa, Cooperative Bank of Kenya, Diamond Trust Bank and NIC Group will be targeting about 3,500 businesses. Well, let's discuss this new development and of course how it will impact the lending industry in Kenya with Billy Owino. He is the CEO of TransUnion Kenya. Very welcome to the show, Mr. Owino.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with the entrance of these 5 banks. How do you think that will change borrowing trends in the country going forward?
Actually, I think it's a very exciting development for us because if you look at the SMEs, especially in the onset of the interest rate caps, they've really been starved of credit because banks stopped lending to them, or this was really cut down quite massively. I think over the years, the last 2 years, growth of credit to the SMEs has been growing at about 2%, which is very, very small. However, when you look at most of the SMEs, they require not so much in terms of funding. It's anywhere from 5,000 shillings, 50,000 shillings, all the way to like something like 200,000 shillings. Right. And this initiative comes to fill in that gap because one of the reasons why the SMEs are thought to be risky is because there's a lot of lack of data on them. Right. So when we go on the mobile, though, however, we can start collecting a lot of data on these SMEs because let's not forget that most of the SMEs are run by individuals. So there's a lot of data you can get from the owner of that company, plus together with how the company is doing, the cash flows on the mobile because they transact on mobile, and build that and use the data that's available to start providing credit risk and credit to these SMEs. So it's a very exciting development for us in this market.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it will certainly increase the need for better infrastructure, better data collection in the industry, better credit scoring as well. Now, banks, a common claim we hear from the banking side is that they have limited data which they can use to make preferential lending decisions. Is there any merit to that argument?
I think it depends on who you're looking at. So, for example, if I'm a customer of the bank today, and I've been transacting and borrowing, that data is there. It's available, However, if a bank is looking at maybe a customer of theirs who's never taken credit, for example, so there's very little that they can assess that customer with. However, out there's a lot of data maybe on that same person, so that data is available that the bank can leverage to be able to start lending to that consumer. And then you have that consumer who's new to credit, has never taken any form of credit, so you can never really assess them. Those are the ones that you can say we've got very little data on them, and they can be the ones that are difficult to assess for credit. However, the landscape has changed quite a bit in terms of depth of data. So today at TransUnion, we've got a profile of 19 million consumers, out of which 11 million are credit active. So which is quite a big amount of data we have, and this has quadrupled over the last 4 years. So data is now there. If combined with the data that the banks have, we have enough to provide credit scores and to do risk-based pricing to banks.
Give us a sense of how this will be done in the Kenya or East African context going forward.
The fundamentals are there. So since 2012, we've had information sharing, both positive and negative, and that really forms the framework that we need. Because remember, for you to be able to do risk-based pricing, implement scores, you need the scores, and that depends on the data. So we've had this data shared by the regulated institutions since 2012. And then 2015, we launched our credit scores as TransUnion. We were first in the market when it comes to that. So we've actually had credit scores since 2015. So the right data is there, the right framework is there. Credit information sharing is happening across all the 3 bureaus. We have 189 lenders today who share data with us. Consumers are becoming more aware of what their credit scores really mean. So I think we have everything in place to really go that way. We've had 4 years of very good data on consumers. So I think what is next now is just for the lenders to start implementing this, adopting credit scores in their lending decisions, out of which, most of the banks, especially the tier ones, have already started doing that. But I think it's work in progress as we go down the tiers.
Right. Yeah. Now, taking us back a little bit, we know the banking charter, which went into effect at the end of the first quarter, it actually compelled banks to make lending and pricing decisions with clients' credit scores in mind. Did this make any difference in the market back then? And how do you think they're going to proceed in that area going forward?
We've just started the journey. However, I'm very positive in terms of the response by the banks. I think what needed to be addressed first was the challenges we've had in terms of consumers getting to really understand, what is a credit score? What does it mean to me? And then on the other side, the lenders also being able to understand that there's enough credit scores, there's enough data for them to be able to make data-driven decisions, because that wasn't happening on the side of the financial institutions, So and the central bank has been very good at driving that initiative with the help of Treasury, CIS Kenya, which is the Association of Credit Institutions in the country, and of course Kenya Bankers Association. And it was more around, let's look at the whole thing, let's unpack it. What's the problem? Is it an understanding on the bank side? Is it an understanding on the consumer side? So that's been tackled now. How is the data? What's the quality of the data? So there's been an initiative the last 6 months to just look at, how is the quality of the data? And that has gone very, very well. Everyone is happy with the quality of the data that we have. So we are very well positioned. So the drive by the central bank to really push for risk-based pricing is very timely, And it's also timely because that's the only way consumers are going to get the benefit of maintaining good credit scores, for example, Because, I say a credit score is like a financial CV, So what's the point of maintaining a good CV if it doesn't really mean anything to me? So it's time for consumers now to start getting benefits of maintaining a good credit score. And this is in terms of them being able to get, better facilities, better interest rates when they're being priced for loans. Or, if a bank was going to ask me for security when they're lending to me, maybe by looking at the data on me, they might realize with my score, they don't need to ask me for security. And this cuts across, both for individuals and even SMEs today who are starved of cash.
Well, give me a sense of how far you think we are from operating in that environment where, like you said, your credit score is sort of like your social security number. How far do you think Kenya is from that?
We're actually very close to getting there.
Right.
If you look at the developed countries, all the fundamentals are in place. I think the deliberate decision that the central bank made to put in the banking charter was really, really necessary to kind of like put it in place. So, it's already happening. Today, if you look at some of the banks, they're actually pricing you based on what your score is.
Really?
So it's happening, and this is across the board for traditional loans. If you're going for a personal loan, vehicle asset finance, or even a mobile loan. So those who purely take mobile loans, especially from the banks, they'll notice that, for example, their limits keep on changing, and that if you look at it and you look at your score, it's correlated to how your score is performing. So it's happening today already.
Well, how do you think that's going to affect rates going forward? Because isn't it impossible for banks to lend to retail clients at the same rate that the state is borrowing from those same institutions?
I think a couple of things need to happen. One, we definitely need to relook at the whole interest rate caps, because despite the fact that we have everything in place to start pricing when it comes to risk-based pricing, as long as we have the caps, it might still not be really possible for the banks to implement that very well, the lenders, and then we won't have the real benefits out to the consumers. So I think we need to relook at that, make it open, and I think the chairman of KBA, who's the CEO of commercial KCB, Mr. Igara, has been very specific about that. He said, even with the repeal of the interest rate caps, they are not going to go haywire and start lending with crazy interest rates. No, they're going to adopt your score. They're going to really look at how your risk profile is and get it going. So those two things need to happen. We need to relook at the interest rate caps, get it out of the way and leave it open for them. But I think the lenders have already signed up to that charter, which really is going to ensure that consumers get the benefit of their scores.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for your great insights into this discussion. Of course, that was Billy Owino. He is the CEO at TransUnion Kenya. Well, let's stay in the country. The government has banned the importation of used car spare parts. The move is part of the country's agenda to gradually phase out second-hand vehicles with the ultimate aim of creating substantial demand for new, locally assembled vehicles. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila with the details.
Imran Khan, a second-hand vehicle spare part dealer, is a worried man. The government has issued a notice banning 17 categories of second-hand vehicle spare parts. The Khan family business has been selling second-hand spare parts for the last 30 years. Imran says the ban will have a huge impact on their business.
In turn, it's going to affect me as well with my prices. Because we won't be able to bring in all the parts that we do from Japan. We'll be able to bring in maybe half the parts. So the prices eventually will go up.
The ban is part of a national automotive policy which seeks to gradually phase out second-hand vehicles to create demand for new, locally assembled vehicles. At present, only 5,000 vehicles are assembled locally against an installed capacity of 34,000 vehicles in a single shift. The 2019 economic survey indicates Kenyans imported vehicle spare parts worth $100 million in 2018, most of them second-hand. Imran is now worried the ban will slow down sales and he may be forced to let some of his staff go.
Lack of sales generally leads to, letting people go because you can't afford to keep them anymore.
Across the street, another second-hand vehicle spare part dealer is still trying to come to terms with the ban.
Most of the parts that we sell, we give guarantee. They are not junks.
Dirango, who has 7 employees, says as a result, clients will have to shoulder the burden of the ban.
Sure, definitely. We'll have to transfer the cost to them so that at least you can balance the margin of what you bought.
The sector employs tens of thousands of Kenyans. Their future now hangs in the balance. But Kenya still lacks the capacity to produce vehicles for the mass market at affordable prices. Industry insiders say the new policy is likely to affect businesses and the public where it hurts most, in the pocket. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's head to Zimbabwe. The country is yet again in the news after transport costs shot up and some commuters were stranded. Of course, that's following Tuesday's 47% hike in fuel prices. The second increase in the space of 5 months is likely to exert further inflationary pressure on the country. That, of course, is already experiencing its highest inflation since 2008. Here's Farai Mwakutuya with more on that from Harare.
After transport operators hiked fares in response to the new fuel prices, commuters had to make alternative plans to get to work on Wednesday. The increase follows the withdrawal of subsidies to fuel companies by the central bank, a fiscally prudent move which is bound to be socially painful.
We are living in a fictitious economy. Our fuel is not being competitively priced. When you then consider the cross rate between the RTGS dollar and then the US dollar. So from me, it's something that I saw coming. The issue is not to do so much with the price of the fuel per se. It's to do with the existing, macroeconomic fundamentals. There is global poverty. People can't afford it. So it's not a question of the price being too high. It's a question of people's disposable incomes being, unbelievably too low.
They will be eroded further by an anticipated wave of price increases across the board.
Public transport has gone up, but commuters' salaries haven't been adjusted. How will they get by? The government should stand for us, the people, and they should reduce the price back down to its previous level. Even that was too high, but at least we had adjusted to that.
The market-driven pricing is expected to eventually ease a crippling shortage.
I have been in the queue for the last 2 days now, and I still haven't got it. So I'm not sure what the government's plan is.
Zimbabwe's treasury says it's working to stabilize the economy, lower inflation and improve export performance. But some here believe the economic measures will come to naught unless backed by political reforms.
We will not move forward. What we can simply continue to get are cosmetic, remedies, face powder, makeup kind of things for the purpose of make believe. But we are not moving forward. I have a strong feeling that as soon as the political fundamentals are addressed, the economic fundamentals will automatically fall into place.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa has initiated a national political dialogue which the Nelson Chamisa-led main opposition MDC alliance has spurned. Fare Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, meanwhile, power cuts are crippling businesses in Zimbabwe. Some blackouts last up to 10 hours daily, affecting livelihoods and productivity in the country. For the last 2 decades, Zimbabwe has struggled to generate adequate electricity, and the government says blackouts will be prolonged due to a drought. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with the details.
Nelson Masaka owns a butchery in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. He is one of many small businessmen and informal sector traders hit by the indefinite rolling blackouts. The blackouts last up to 10 hours per day and were imposed last week by the country's state power utility.
I have been operating this butchery for 12 years, but right now the electricity crisis is terrible. Sometimes we can go for 8 hours without power, and yet I trade in perishable goods. So without power, I can't cut the meat, and this makes basic operations very difficult.
The power cuts add more pressure on an economy hurt by a devastating drought and cyclone this year. While large companies can resort to fuel-driven generators to power their businesses, many small traders are struggling in a country where inflation soared to a 10-year high of almost 76% in April, eroding incomes and savings. With formal jobs scarce, the informal sector and small businesses are the backbone of Zimbabwe's economy, contributing to 60% of the country's $21 billion GDP, according to the International Monetary Fund. Masaka says the blackouts are cutting to the bone.
I now keep a fuel jerrycan here because any time when power goes, I have to close the shop and go to the petrol station to buy diesel for the generator so that I can keep the business running. But diesel is also expensive and not readily available, which is another challenge. So I only power up the generator at night so that the next day the fridges are cold enough to store meat. That's the situation in this country.
The rolling blackouts have so far spared mines as well as large industrial sites. But in the residential areas and local business centers, where most of the informal traders and small businesses operate, the power cuts are causing grief. John Alfonso, a private tutor, has turned to using candles or the flashlight on his phone for his work.
The way to go is the solar system. I don't know what the government will do, but to bring about solar, that will save the situation. But long back, 5 years ago, they were talking about going solar. I don't know where the project went. It just vanished in thin air. So I think if they embarked on this project, it would be somewhere.
For the past 20 years, Zimbabwe has struggled to generate enough electricity to meet demand. It has had to turn to countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Namibia, Mozambique, South Africa and Zambia to top up supplies. During the 2000 to 2008 recession, when the country was in the grip of a dollar crunch and hyperinflation, it became harder for it to pay for the imports, leading to most of these countries demanding cash up front. With the current blackouts, it's hoped that the Southern African country will find sustainable solutions to its never-ending power problem. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's head over to Nigeria now. It has been over a year since the country came out of a recession, but economic recovery has been slow so far. Latest GDP figures released by the country's statistics office show that the economy grew by a sluggish 2.01% in the first quarter of 2019, as of course the country's dominant oil sector shrank. It is a drop from the previous quarter's 2.38%. The government is, however, optimistic of attaining a GDP growth of 3.01% this year. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
One thing is certain from the GDP figures released by the National Bureau of Statistics. Nigeria's economy is on the path of growth, but the growth is surely not as fast as many would want it. The 2.01% growth is the strongest first quarter performance since 2015 and represents an increase of 0.12 percentage points compared to the first quarter figure of 2018, which was 1.89%. But when placed against the figure of the last quarter of 2018, the real GDP growth rate declined by minus 0.38%.
Yeah, for me, if you compare the growth rate of first quarter of 2018, which was 1.89%, to the 2.01%, that's a marginal improvement. But I think the appropriate thing is to compare the latest quarter, which was the last quarter of last year, because the economic development should be a continuum. Given that even that at the 2.38% we had in the last quarter of last year was still considered quite low. Our population is growing about 2.7%, and there is no society that will develop if GDP growing at below the population growth rate. So that's where the concerns are, that we should expect that the government will step on the gas pedal and fasten the rate at which the GDP is growing and which the economy is expanding.
The GDP figures clearly show despite government's diversification efforts, Nigeria is still very much an oil-dependent economy. The oil sector contracted by minus 2.40%, mainly resulting in the overall lower GDP figure for the quarter.
The growth we saw was largely driven by the non-oil sector and principally the agriculture sector, which grew by 3.17%, because agriculture sector accounts more than 20% of the GDP. So because of the size of the agriculture sector, you saw that it propelled a growth, overall growth in the GDP. But that is not enough as we stand today, because the agriculture we practice today is largely subsistent. It's when we don't have so much of industrial agriculture.
One sector everyone had been keeping an eye on is the manufacturing sector, which has the capacity for mass employment. While it recorded a positive growth of 0.81%, the increase could be described as marginal.
A marginal growth of 0.81% is actually teetering on the edge of a decline, or a decline. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to stimulate the manufacturing sector?
The Nigerian government remains optimistic the economy will continue to grow. It's projecting a GDP growth rate of 3.01% in 2019. But it sure would be hoping the economy does better than it is currently doing for the remaining quarters to be able to meet its target. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come. Growing uncertainty on whether Theresa May can breathe some life into her Brexit plan. And more Chinese tech firms could be on the line as tensions with the US escalate.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Welcome back. Now, on the international front, UK Prime Minister Theresa May has made a final attempt at persuading lawmakers in the UK to back her new Brexit deal. However, the agreement and May's leadership are already looking dead in the water. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister made a last-ditch effort to save her Brexit deal by offering changes to an agreement that has already been rejected about 3 times.
We need to see Brexit through, to honour the result of the referendum and to deliver the change the British people so clearly demanded. I sincerely believe that most members of this House feel the same, that for all our division and disagreement, we believe in democracy, that we want to make good on the promise we made to the British people when we asked them to decide on the future of our EU membership. So to those MPs who want a second referendum to confirm the deal, I say, you need a deal, and therefore a withdrawal agreement bill to make it happen. Let it have its second reading, and then make your case to Parliament.
Well, let's move on now to the ongoing trade tensions between the world's top 2 economies. China has slammed the US over reports that it is considering Huawei-like sanctions on as many as 5 Chinese tech companies. Now, the restrictions will ban the firms from accessing American components or software. At the same time, they'll require US firms to obtain government approval in order to supply parts to these companies. Chinese video surveillance firm Hikvision and Zhejiang Dahua Technology are set to be the latest victims on that escalating trade war. Now, the recent reports have sparked speculations that the trade war between the world's leading powerhouses could further inflame.
Recently, the United States has been abusing its state power to willfully smear and suppress companies of other countries, including Chinese companies. We have made it clear that China is opposed to such practice. China has always required its companies to abide by market law and international rules when conducting business in other countries. At the same time, we have been asking other countries to provide a fair and non-discriminatory environment for Chinese companies. Trade and investment relations between countries must be based on mutual respect, equality and mutual benefit.
Now, despite pressure from the United States, Huawei is pressing ahead with its global plans. Its sub-brand Honor has unveiled its latest smartphone in London. US tech giant Google has blocked Huawei from using Gmail and Maps on its Android phones in order to comply with a US government order. Well, CGTN's Juliet Mann was at the Honor 20 series launch event in London, and she brings us this story.
Here at the launch of the Honor 20 series, the budget version of parent company Huawei's P30 Pro range, the buzz is about all the technology that's packed inside, including 4 cameras. And even though Google has changed the way it deals with Huawei, which might mean that owners of Honor and Huawei handsets might be denied access to certain apps and to core Android services, the smartphone brand is fully prepared. Some analysts question that.
Right now, Huawei and thus Honor don't seem to have anything in place to replace Android if it does go away, which means that it's incredibly paramount for these companies to remain as part of Google's partnerships, because if Google takes away that license, then an integral part of all of these handsets goes away. There's no evidence right now that Huawei or Honor have anything that can really rival what Android provides to these handsets, or even provide anything that could help consumers continue to use their handsets on the daily. So right now, it's really important that they come to some sort of agreement.
Huawei is in the eye of a political storm over next-generation 5G mobile technology and what role it should have in it. The United States, the Trump administration has banned the company from acquiring technology from US firms without government approval.
Even in the UK, I mean, Mintel's data shows that Huawei's share has increased from 2% in 2018 to 7% in 2019. So again, it's sort of just in the UK alone you're seeing that growth, and of course with the growth across the globe, it's really doing well.
With a record 59 million phones shipped in the first quarter of 2019, Huawei has set its sights on becoming the world's biggest smartphone producer within a year.
What I think they do really well is provide really good specifications for a pretty affordable price point. If the demographic that Honor is looking for are people more or less my age or even younger, then of course having an affordable handset is going to be really important. And especially with the Honor 20 Pro, they've done a great job of actually providing good power, good performance.
But the big question is whether consumers will be spooked by the Google restrictions. If they are, it might mean big implications for Huawei's business outside China. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Meanwhile, Japan is falling behind in the global cashless payments trend, and to counter that, it is seeking to increase digital payments to 40% of all transactions by 2025. Of course, Japan is looking to boost productivity amidst a labor shortage and improve transparency so the government can collect taxes more efficiently. While CGTN's Tokyo's Terence Terashima has this report.
In Japan, 80% of people still use cash, and cashless payment system has been slow to take off. One of the reasons is that Japan already has many prepaid card systems, and majority of people like to keep cash at hand in case of emergencies, such as earthquakes, which Japan is known for. Also, companies are reluctant to introduce new systems due to high commissions. That's why more attention is being drawn to easy to set up commission-free QR code payment methods in recent years. But while these bring extra convenience, they're also an enticing opportunity for criminals. However, there have been moves to beef up security in this area. One IT company has developed an authentication system that prevents identity fraud and QR code scams, which they say might also have a wider application in the future.
The system uses digital signatures which are incorporated into the QR codes. These can ensure correct information and prevent any kind of identity fraud or information tampering.
Users do not have to enter username or password when shopping online or making payments. The newly developed system provides two-way authentication. QR codes sent by this server can be authenticated with a smartphone app. Each code is unique and it cannot be stolen or reused, which means it can be used for a number of applications such as ticketing, payment, and identification.
This QR code system provides very strong security platforms which in the future can be used for virtual currency transactions or currencies unique to a particular site. It has diverse possibilities.
However, IT experts warn that while security technologies are advancing rapidly and the need is imminent, Implementing these security systems will take more time. Companies are still slow to recognize the importance of cybersecurity here. Terence Hiroshima, CGTN, Tokyo.
Well, shifting focus now, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices were down after industry data showed an increase in U.S. crude inventories, as well as demand concerns which are linked to a protracted trade war between China and the U.S. Meanwhile, gold prices holding near the more than 2-week low hit in the previous session, as of course we saw the dollar strengthen today, while signs of an escalation in China-U.S. trade talks weakened risk appetite and of course limited further declines. Well, let's take a short break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. Tunisia launches a program that supports female agricultural workers.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, Tunisia's government has introduced a program aimed at strengthening social coverage to rural Tunisian women. Now, the new measures will integrate female agricultural workers into the country's social security system in order to allow them to benefit from government health and pension services. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with more.
Ahmini, translated as Protect Me, is a social security and health coverage program initiated by the government. The project aims to broaden the base of affiliates of the National Social Security Fund, CNSS, among rural women working in different conditions and not benefiting from any social coverage.
This is an extraordinary project which guarantees the rights of women working in the agricultural sector. Rural women in Tunisia do not have access to social services. They do not have time, the transportation means and money. Now the administration comes to rural areas.
Parliamentarians estimate that 500,000 women in rural areas will benefit from this program.
It's very difficult for the state to know the exact number of women working in the agricultural sector in rural areas. There's no clear database. These women work without contract. They're underpaid and sometimes exploited. The government project will protect their rights.
Authorities stress the simplicity of the registration process, which takes place through the payment of social security contributions from a mobile phone.
I've been working in the agricultural sector for 20 years without social security. My mother died while working in the field. She did not have a social security number. Now I just use my mobile to guarantee my rights.
Hundreds of delegates of the Ahmini program are now touring the rural areas across Tunisia as part of a campaign to register women farmers. Tunisian authorities have explained the popularity of the new social security program by the simplification of the registration process and the fact that it is not necessary to present a birth certificate for the person concerned and the beneficiaries like family members. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
And in South Africa, a mall owner who manages some of the biggest malls in Johannesburg will soon ban the use of plastic bags in its shopping centers. While some African countries have banned plastic bags completely, South Africa still has been slow to do so. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
Legislation requires that South Africans pay for plastic bags, but this has no cut use. Liberty 2 Degrees has taken a bold step to make its malls plastic-free. More than 20 million people frequent the group's shopping centres every year, which includes the popular Sandton City.
To just buy a plastic bag means you just pay away for the problem. That's not going to save our oceans, taking the bags out and bringing other alternatives to plastic into this environment. That's what we are after, and that's a change that we want to start.
The switch to biodegradable bags has been slow. Consumers use in excess of 8 billion plastic bags a year. It's environmentally damaging, but cheaper than greener options.
There are such a myriad of opportunities to start new businesses, to help new entrepreneurs that will do good for the environment, that will go back into the ground and don't actually damage the space that we leave for our children after us.
Banner Blankets, which makes reusable material bags, could soon be a supplier. The Alexandra-based NGO provides work for women who cannot find jobs.
If we can create a demand for our bags, then we can make bags and sell them. And the hope and the plan is to provide people who are shopping with alternatives to plastic bags and giving them an opportunity to buy a bag from this project in Alex.
The movement to get rid of single-use plastics is growing. Liberty's decision to ban packets completely may spark a significant change in consumer habits, which has been difficult to break. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling weakening against the dollar, and that's due to increased end-month dollar demand from oil and merchandise importers. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand slightly stronger against the dollar today, and that's after some ANC politicians asked to be removed from the ANC MPs list. Now, analysts are saying the boost from local political developments was small, and investors are still waiting to see the size and the composition of Ramaphosa's new cabinet. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.